Okie dokie. So we are back. It has, well, I was talking right before we started here. It's been a crazy week, but we also have a lot of crazy material to cover. So I did have, like I always have, when it comes to the stuff that I didn't cover from the last week, I did forget to mention two things. One thing has to do with, remember when God tells Abraham that your descendants will be as many as the stars. And there's another section as well where you have, God says that he will have, actually no, it talks about the Israelites having that, like the descendants like the stars, that they were so numerous, that they were as numerous as the stars. That was the primary thing that was going on, like with that. And if you remember, when it comes to certain, hold on one second. Okay, so when it comes to certain, remember that we were talking about the Elohim. And in Genesis 1, we had the stars that were actually considered part of the heavenly bodies. You had the sun, you had the moon, and you had the stars. And from that, you had when Abraham is told that you will have as many descendants as the stars. There's argument there that it's saying that like your descendants will replace the stars. Essentially, like talking about like the people who had fallen beings and all that stuff. So anyway, just one second. But yeah, I think my point is made clear there. Another thing is when we were looking in Numbers and the people were scouting out the land. One second. All right. So, anyways, what I was saying. Sorry about that, guys. So I am. So to reiterate. So when Abraham was told that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, there is debate that his descendants are being said to be replacing the stars, and it makes sense too when you're talking about Israel being like a nation of priests, that they're able to overtake the surrounding nations. In a way, they are the ones that enact the Edenic living within the land. Now, another thing that's important too is when they were scouting out the land in Numbers, and they came back with the report that they were the people of the land were too powerful, and they would be infiltrating that they would be obliterated if they were to go into the land. It is interesting that it is at this point that Israel is getting afraid of there's like a weird parallel being made with the gods of the other nations that had made these nations strong. That there's a parallel there that when the people of Israel, so Yahweh's children, were not going into the land there, the other gods had scared them off. And that was part of the thing. So this is where God's saying, no, I'm going to enact the judgment upon the other nations, and particularly their gods. And we are going to be talking about that today. Like what you'll come across like certain parts of, if not today, then definitely next week, where a certain statue might fall over. I remember this one, I think it's Dagon, that has its hand and head cut off. What? Dagon. Okay, yeah. So so it's really interesting there because God is actually basically saying, no, I am the God of gods here. And so when the Israelites were entering before, and God said, well, you're not going to get this inheritance, and you're going to have to wait 40 years. It was because they were scared away by these nations that belong to other gods. So this is an interesting way of looking at that as well. I thought it was worth talking about. So anyway, all right. So today we are going to enter Joshua. I don't know how far we'll go. I actually am prepared to go all the way until the choosing of Saul, but we'll just take this one bit at a time. As before, input if you have any is cool. We always talk about that. So does anyone know what Joshua's name means?
I just read it.
It's also Jesus' name. It's exactly the same name. It's just a different. We pronounce it
about Yahweh.
Yes. Yahweh does what?
taking me a while to get off the mute. Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is salvation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Yahweh saves. Yeah. So Yahweh saves. God saves. And so what's interesting is a lot of Joshua and Judges has to do, and even the beginning of Samuel, has to do with a lot of killing and a lot of obliteration of other people groups. So it's interesting that Joshua's name means God saves, but if we look at it from a modern perspective, which is not the purpose of this gathering, but looking at it from a modern perspective, it's disturbing. Both of these books are very disturbing, and they kind of get worse as things go on. There's even a section that we'll talk about in Judges that basically 3 chapters in a row, it begins with there was no king in Israel during those days. And this has to do, and we're talking about the implication of that later, but anyway. But this has to, like, it just is like a really, I know the Bible Project talks about it being like a spiral effect, and indeed it really is. So it's interesting when you're looking at Joshua. Joshua is going in for the predominance of the book. He is enacting righteous judgment against the gods of the other nations as well as the nations. So what's interesting to me here is that God is using remember how we talked in earlier, way back when, that God does compromise. He compromised many times in the previous studies that we have done. And so this is another example of his compromise. He speaks the language of the surrounding people. Yeah, of course, like there was like this great thing with Egypt. And there's even sections of these 2 books where Egypt, they bring up Egypt. Oh, and it's Samuel. I think it's the beginning of Samuel, where they bring up Egypt and they don't want to be obliterated like Egypt was. But still, a lot of these groups did not know anything except for human strength. To them, it was human strength that denoted how powerful God was. And you're going to notice that a lot of these stories have to do with small numbers, or not what we, even as modern, from a modern viewpoint, what we would consider truly strong. So it was God enacting justice, but in ways that kind of like turned the tables upside down. And it's really interesting when you look at it from that perspective, but it is very disturbing stuff. And so what I'm going to do with these 2 books is look at stuff and point out particular facets that have to, like, for example, you could read the stories for yourself. We had a group last year that went through the Bible in the span of just over a year. So so you can read these stories, but there are certain points that I am going to be pointing out that are really, I guess you could say, it kind of like tickles the brain a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. So chapter 1 of Joshua, verses 17 and 18. So where it says, "We will obey you, just as we obeyed Moses." Anyway, and may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your orders and does not obey your words, and everything you command will be put to death. So be strong and courageous. So I think it's interesting. It's a tad bit of anti-foreshadowing, I guess you could say. So it's like it's definitely not looking good, because remember what they told Moses at the beginning. Yes, of course we'll follow these commands. And here we are with Joshua saying, we'll do the same thing that we did with Moses. Great. Anyway, all right. So now I do want to talk about Rahab for a second. So I did look into this. So there are 2 Rahabs. It actually is a different vowel structure in both of the words. One of them has to do with the word for width or breadth. And that's the Rahab of Joshua. I did mention another Rahab that is the emblematic name for Egypt that appears 3 times in the Old Testament. Remember, we're talking about how there were times like when we were talking about how Moses was drawn from the water, and the people were drawn out of the water of the Red Sea, or the Red Sea, however you translate it. Not to mention how there was a lot of sea monster play. The word Rahab, in terms of the emblematic term for Egypt, has to do with chaotic waters. It has to do with a sea monster as well, and being and how out of this sea monster, I drew you. It's really cool imagery. I did want to present that. But the Rahab in Joshua is different, and this is like Jesus's great how many times you want grandma. And what's interesting is Jesus is also considered a king in the Christian faith. So when you think about this, what king would really talk about the fact that they were descended from a prostitute? This is interesting wording. Like when you look, we looked at the Sumerian kings. I think it was the Sumer tablets or whatever it was. I showed it in the previous thing. And they were talking about like the great feats these kings did and all the wonderful things and how they were like perfect in every way. And here's Jesus's line with a prostitute. And there's only a few women mentioned in Jesus's genealogy, and one of them is a prostitute. Very interesting. So Tamar is another one that's mentioned. But anyway, so so in chapter 2, verse 5, they left the town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they were. So this is Rahab talking. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. What? Now, she's not an Israelite, mind you. But what is the 9th commandment? I'm talking particularly to my parents because what?
False witness. Don't bear false witness.
So would you say that this is bearing false witness here?
I would have to say yes. Well, what do you expect from a prostitute?
Wow!
And what about the Egyptian midwives? They did too. Yep.
Yes. And this is, so it goes back to, when we were talking about the legal code of the Torah, remember I said before that it's not a strict code per se. There's some strict aspects to it, but there is definitely places where it can bend. Compare that to modern legal code, that is completely different. Like if you have to follow by the line of the law, there are different cases, as the Bible portrays quite clearly, that the legal code is not a hard and set legal code, especially when justice is being served, and in a sense of like righteous judgment, in terms of justice. Righteousness is maintaining an equal playing field, and justice is bringing the inequality back to the righteous equality. That's how the Hebrew language talks about it. So it is interesting that she did provide false witness.
But
yes.
But my understanding would be that it says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So like in a court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But the thing is,
to save somebody might be a little different.
But Rahab is talking against her neighbors on this one. She's working against her neighbor.
But it's not to harm somebody in a court.
No. But she knows that this will lead to death and destruction.
Well, yeah, she does.
It's weird. It's weird to really think about. I mean, there are some things that, think back to the Tamar story. That is a weird story altogether, but yet she's deemed righteous. And it's really interesting how we look at certain things differently in a modern context. But all right, so chapter 3, all of it. So we were talking about being drawn from water or drawn out of the Red Sea. And here Joshua is leading the people where the Ark of the Covenant is placed in the middle of the Jordan, and it dries everything up to the point where everyone can cross over while the Ark remains in the middle. In a sense, this is Joshua replaying the role of Moses to a smaller level and also a somewhat different level, but it's once again like a very Moses-like figure. And remember, Moses transferred, and it says in Scripture, some of his authority, not all of it, but some of his authority. And so this is kind of like a mini Moses playing out right now. And there's more evidence of this later. So it is interesting how certain themes repeat themselves. Oh, and also, another thing about the drawing out of water. Remember, water is often considered chaos, like the sea waters, and the land was drawn out. And then you also have Noah that was drawn out from the ark that was built after the waters receded, and you have Moses being drawn out. And then it goes back even to the baptism. When we are baptized, we are drawn out of the water. It's really interesting how they're being drawn out of the rushing Jordan River. So anyway, they're also being drawn from the wilderness. That's another aspect as well. They're going east to west. And so they are leaving the wilderness and entering the lands of milk and honey. And this is really cool. So, all right. So, chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" Do you remember what I said about any angelic being with a drawn sword in their hand?
God.
It is God himself. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's funny because I always thought of this as something like Gabriel or Michael or something, but there's textual evidence that it's quite clearly God himself. And so Joshua asks God, "Are you friend or foe?" "Neither one," he replied. "I'm the commander of the Lord's army." Now, this is the thing. Do we honestly think that this is God speaking, even though it says, "I'm the commander of the Lord's army"? The Lord of hosts. We also have you also have God being portrayed as the angel of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord, or the name. So yeah, there are different ways to refer to him, and yes, this is very clearly God himself. He is the Lord of the heaven's armies. So I am the commander of the Lord's army. At this,
there's another minor thing there, Joel, is that he bent down and kneeled before him, and if he was an angel, they would tell him not to do that.
Yep, he wasn't told to get it. I was just getting there.
Oh, sorry.
Well, you're fine. You got it. That's it. He fell down and nothing happened. He was like, "Remove your sandals." So at this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I'm at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army said, "Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. Do we need more evidence that he is playing a Moses role? From like the other time that we hear of someone removing their sandals is, I wonder when. So and this is also Moses when he came pretty much face to face with God, but in the form of fire within of a tree of life of sorts. Now he's seeing him in a more military style, and the entire book has to deal with military dominance over the nation. So this is interesting, like different like images, as well as like repetition of previous themes and also mixing up of themes. It's really cool when you look at it that way. Anyway, in chapter 6 you have the story of Jericho, and this is a story where Israel shows the fullest of faith. They do exactly as directed. They do absolutely everything the way that Joshua told them, except for this one guy, but we'll get to that in a minute. And so this is basically how God, so what they did was they walked around 6 times for 6 days, and on the 7th time it was 7 times. The 7th day it was 7 times. Fascinatingly, they blew the trumpets, and this fell down, like the walls fell down on their own merit, and they weren't and so they rushed in and they destroyed the city, and it was just more evidence of how God was with them, that God was definitely, they had heeded him, as well as he was enacting judgment upon the nations, and it was clear that there was something supernatural happening with the blowing of the trumpets and the crashing of the walls. So, but then you have chapter 7, verse 1, which is all great. So, but Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord. A man named Achan had stolen some of these dedicated things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites. Achan was the son of Carmi, a descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah in the tribe of Judah. All right. So what I love about studying Hebrew is like how certain things like really slap you in the face. And it's unfortunate that this name is not translated. Does anyone have a guess at what Achan means? Troublemaker. So this guy named Troublemaker. I highly doubt he was actually named Troublemaker. There are other instances, and it's funny, like Ruth has it like 3 times, like where you have like some guy named he's about to die, and then some other guy named he's really sick, and then you have like the names mean this, and then some other guys like named like that guy over there. Yeah, stick going done for it, and then you have so and so. These are names that I don't think that they were their actual names. And it's funny. So you have this guy named Troublemaker. Now I do want to show the interlinear here. So this will be fun. Oh, I didn't tell you. We're supposed to memorize all Hebrew verb forms by the end of tonight. So let's go ahead and we're going to have a test on this next week. But anyway, yeah, but I actually planned on showing you guys this thing. Yeah, you will have a test on all these forms next week. It should be easy, okay? So no issue whatsoever.
We've been looking at them.
So anyway, so verse 1, I did want to do in the interlinear. So regarding your things for took Achan. Okay, cool. So what did he do? What did Achan actually do? He took. Do we have any stories of someone taking things? Like Eve, when she sees something and takes it, and if you don't think that happens, he totally mentions it in verse 21. But anyway, so Achan took, and the accursing, so burn. Okay, so burn the anger of the Lord. It doesn't say that, and we already talked about this, but it's really fun how it's right in your face. So burn what?
Israel?
Yeah, but burn what? What's the word for anger?
Nose or his nostrils?
God's nose burned against Israel. His nose got hot. Anyway, yeah, so it was like, oh, there we go. All right. So then let's go to verse 21 as well. No. There we go. So look, when I saw among the spoils, there's a reason why this is in parentheses, but I'm not going into it. Something was what? I saw something as not beautiful. Do you recognize the word?
Pleasant to the eyes, maybe, I'm guessing. Based
Well,
on you.
what is the word for bad? Like the knowledge of good and evil. What's the word for bad in Hebrew from the Bible Project podcast that you guys have been listening to?
I don't remember.
In English pronunciation, raw. So do you remember good? Tov. I saw that it was good. And I saw Tov and raw. Yep. And then you have with the he took. So I saw that they were beautiful. I saw that they were good. These things, and this is exactly the same. These 3 letters are what you see in Eve. Did God really say? Mm-hmm. Wait. So one saw the woman that was good, the tree for food, and that pleasant it was to the eyes. and desirable. I'll look at that. So just look at that for 1 second. It's kind of like, I don't know how to describe the letters there, but you can see the H, the M, and the D. H, M, D. We took them. And so isn't it so really cool? It's like, I wonder if they're drawing a parallel. I don't know. So, I don't know. So, just saying. Fascinating stuff. So we got that done. Okay. In chapter 8, 34 to 35. Joshua then read to them all the blessings and curses Moses had written in the book of instruction. Every word of every command that Moses had ever given was read to the entire assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. Where did these foreigners come from?
Most likely Egypt.
Because
it was a mixed multitude that came out.
It was a mixed multitude, you're right. There was also debate that they completely destroyed certain cities.
What?
So there's also a debate that they didn't completely destroy certain cities. And when it says that they killed everyone in there, that potentially they didn't. And that as long as they gave their allegiance to Yahweh, then Yahweh brought them in to live among them. Remember also, too, that that God says in the Torah, if there are foreigners among you, let them graze the fields after you have. This is all the, so there's implication here that there is somewhat hyperbole in this, in the description of them completely ransacking the place. Now, when it comes to Jericho, the one thing that Achan was accused of was stealing the items. But killing every single individual, potentially. Please understand, I'm battling with this myself because it just seems like it's complete destruction. But yet, they're also talking about foreigners living among them. And it does, and it's repeated. And then for crying out loud, you got there's an issue with Moab, but yet Ruth can join. And it's interesting how you when you look at it from certain perspectives. Anyway, so all right, and chapter 9, verse 15. Then Joshua made a peace treaty with them and guaranteed their safety, and the leaders of the community ratified their agreement with a binding oath. And so this is the beginning of, unfortunately, when God said, don't do this. And it says right in the chapter why they did it, is because they didn't consult God in the process. And that becomes a factor. Of course, even if you read it, it becomes clear that they stopped going to God and asking for counsel. There are some places where they do it out of convenience. And I don't know, it's just really interesting. By the time we get to the end of Judges, there's going to be a section where it says, and they consulted God, but basically he said, yes, do this, and they did, but yet they did all these other things. It's like they consulted him as much as they would consult other gods. And it's a definitely emerging of ideologies there. So I'm going to jump. Because really, there's all this stuff about the different lands given, the battle fought, and I'm going to jump to chapter 23, verses 7 to 16. So it's a large chunk, it's just towards the end. So chapter 23, verses 7 to 16. Make sure you do not associate with the other people still remaining in the land. They already did, and so did Joshua. So I'm just saying it seems just a little tad bit hyperbolic for like that. What he's saying is don't associate with the things they do. So anyway, don't even mention the names of their gods. Example of that. Yeah, don't even mention their gods' names. Don't really give support to what they do. Much less swear by them or serve them or worship them. Rather, cling tightly to the Lord your God as you've done until now. When is the first time we hear of cling? Adam and Eve. And this is, so this, God, this is just the first time I'm mentioning it here. I have mentioned it in our Song of Songs study before. But this is the first time I'm mentioning it here. Just bear with me. The Hebrew, when we get into the wisdom literature, there is the conception that God is, hold on, just listen to what I have to say. The wisdom of God, so this is part of God, just like the angel of the Lord is actually God. And then when you are looking at the name, it's actually God. When you're looking at that, also the drawn, the Lord of the armies of heaven, that's God. So just bear with me on that one, right? Wisdom is personified as a woman in Hebrew literature, and that she's often called Lady Wisdom. And this is an attribute and also an identification that God takes. When you look at it from that perspective, remember that it says that Adam will cling to his wife. And in a similar way, Joshua is telling Israel to cling to Lady Wisdom. This is the beginning of that really, and Moses kind of mentioned it before, but there's that look at it as well. There's a flip side. This is called chiastic parallelism, where it's like exactly the opposite, where you have God is a male figure, and you have Israel as the woman. And often in this portrayal, the woman is a prostitute and is unfaithful. This is considered Lady Folly. And so it's really interesting, and this is the first time I'm mentioning it very clear cut, so I'm going to reiterate it because it will come into play later. You have Lady Wisdom, God, Lady Folly, the stupidity of Israel, I guess you could say. And so when it's that perception of Lady Folly, then God takes the male role in terms of description. It's flipped around when they're doing the right thing, and you have the man searching for wisdom, and that's a very common theme of Proverbs. And when it gets to Song of Songs, you can look at it from both perspectives, because there are times where the woman kind of acts like Lady Folly, and there are times where she acts like Lady Wisdom. And it's really cool to look at it. And I love actually looking at Song of Songs from two different perspectives. The traditional Jewish perspective is that the woman is God and that the man is us looking for her. But then you have the Christian perspective that has the man is Christ and the woman is the church wanting to join him. And you can see it from both ways. And that's what I like about this type of weird parallel cyclical nature. I just wanted to mention that. Does anyone have anything to say before I go on from that? Any questions about that? Okay. Back to the reading. So, so I think it was like 7 or I was on verse 7 or something. Make sure you do not associate with the other people still remaining in the land. Do not even mention the names of their gods, much less swear by them or serve them or worship them. Rather, cling tightly to the Lord your God as you've done until now. For the Lord has driven out great and powerful nations for you, and no one has yet been able to defeat you. Each one of you will put to flight 1,000 of the enemy. For the Lord your God fights for you, just as he has promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away from him and cling to the customs of the survivors of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry with them, remember what we talked about Genesis 6? Same thing. Then then know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive them out of your land. Instead, they will be a snare and a trap to you, a whip for your backs, and thorny brambles in your eyes, and you will vanish from this good land the Lord your God has given you. Soon I will die, going the way of everything on earth. Deep in your hearts you know that every promise of the Lord your God has come true. Not a single one has failed. But as surely as the Lord your God has given you the good things he promised, he will also bring disaster on you if you disobey him. He will completely destroy you from this good land he has given you. If you break the covenant, marriage vow, basically, of the Lord your God by worshiping and serving other gods, if you prostitute yourself to the other nations, and this is a very common theme, his anger will burn against you. I wonder what it's saying there. His nose is going to get very hot. And you will quickly vanish from the good land he has given you. This is actually somewhat poetic in the way it's portrayed. This is called parallelism, and which means like if you look from like 12 to 13 and then 14 to 16, it's almost the same thing. It's almost exactly the same thing. So look at that again. But if you turn away from him and cling to the customs of the survivors of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry with them, then know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive them out of your land. Instead, they'll be a snare and a trap to you, a whip for your backs and thorny brambles in your eyes, and you'll vanish from the good land the Lord your God has given them. And it's funny, so wait a second. So that's one way of saying it, and then it gets amplified in the next section. But as surely as the Lord, starting in 15, but as surely as the Lord your God has given you the good things he promised, he'll also bring disaster on you if you disobey him, and he'll completely destroy you from this good land he's given you. If you break the covenant of the Lord your God by worshiping and serving other gods, his anger will burn against you, and you will quickly vanish from the good land he's given you. It's very clearly a repetition, and it's more like an amplification of what's being said there. So cool stuff, and we are getting into poetry today. So, all right. Chapter 24. This is the last one I got in Joshua. So, chapter 24. But verses 14 to 26. It's quite the lengthy part. So, chapter 24, verse 14 to the end. No, not quite. Not quite. To 26. So, 14. So, fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River. What direction is the Euphrates River? East. So I'll just pull it up for you so you can see it. Euphrates River. Hold on. I'm just getting the map here. See? So they're over here, right? And so beyond the Euphrates River, so they meant like way over here. So this is considered east. It's you have the wilderness. Actually, the wilderness kind of stretches all here, but it's when you remember when your ancestors lived beyond the Euphrates River. And this is a really cool way of saying when your ancestors lived in the East. And it's really cool stuff. In different ways, slightly different nuances of how they say it, but it's very much talking about being in the East. So, and in Egypt, in this being like the chaotic waters that Egypt represents. Serve the Lord alone. Don't worship other gods, right? But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites in the land you now live? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. The people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord our God is the one who rescued us and our ancestors from slavery in the land of Egypt. He performed mighty miracles before our very eyes. As we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies, he preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations living here in the land. So we too will serve the Lord, for he alone is our God. Then Joshua warned the people. Actually, I think it says something else. Wait a second. Wait. I think it does say something else. I might be wrong. I could be very wrong. So let me just verify real quick. In verse 19. Oh, no, he just said. Okay, never mind. He just said. All right, cool, awesome. Never mind. So, so Joshua warned the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. That's a wonderful one. You're not able. For he's holy and jealous. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you abandon the Lord and serve other gods, he will turn against you and destroy you, even though he has been so good to you. But the people answered Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. You are a witness to your own decision, Joshua said. You have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, they replied, we are witnesses to what we have said. All right, then, Joshua said, destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And when he means turn your hearts, it means your mind as well. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, so we will obey him alone. I'm sorry, it's just like really hammering home this idea. So Joshua made a covenant. It's very interesting that he makes a covenant, but anyway, with the people that day at Shechem, committing them to follow the decrees and regulations of the Lord. Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions. So the traditional way of looking at things is that Moses wrote the entire Torah, but strangely enough, it's basically saying that Joshua wrote it too. So, and it's really interesting. As a reminder of their agreement, he took a huge stone and rolled it beneath the terebinth tree beside the tabernacle of the Lord. So Joshua said to all the people, this stone has heard everything the Lord said to us. It will be a witness to testify against you if you go back on your word to God. I think it's a clear picture, but I have heard that it's not so clear of a picture. It just basically means you see this rock, it's a remembrance of the day that we had just had today. So that your generation, the generations after you can see this rock and know that that rock was rolled there because of this. So, anyway. And then he died at 110. I don't know any reason why it would be 110. Remember Moses, 120. It's pretty obvious why he had 3 distinct 40-year sections. I don't know why 110. I'll just be honest with you. But I think it has to have some meaning. But yeah, that's interesting. So that is Joshua.
Maybe it was 110 because he was like Moses, but not exactly.
I'm wondering too. I did think about that before, and then you have Joseph as well, and it is interesting because I don't know. It's just fascinating. But that's all I got for Joshua. It's not really talk about like the different imagery and stuff like that. I think the one thing that really affects me is Achan. The story of Achan being just like the story of Eve. When I see something as beautiful and desirable, and that's yes.
I was thinking of Joseph and Joshua being like bookends.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Joseph, they came into Moses. He died at 110. Joshua brought them out basically,
and then died at 110. That is interesting. Yeah, that could very well be the reason for that. All right.
Back to the promised land, back in the promised land from Egypt.
Could very well. I'm open to I'm open to any opinion on that one because honestly, it's just a really cool thing though that Joseph and Joshua died at 110. Moses died at 120 for obvious reasons, and it's cool. Anything on Joshua before we head into Judges? Okay, so I'm going to do an introduction of Judges before we get started, and then we'll have a break, and then maybe we'll do a little bit, but I don't want to, this is going to be a fun one. Judges is extremely violent. It's super violent. And it's interesting because that's not the conception of judges that we would think today. like judges enacting very horrendously violent acts. And all the different like dramas that are happening. Very convoluted idea of righteousness is portrayed in this book. And it's meant to be. It's not like you look at certain judges and think, this is the type of person I want to model myself after. It doesn't really happen. The only one that's potential is Deborah. And then like maybe some here and there, some of them have like single line mentions. But we talked about the purpose of judgment in Hebrew thought was to make like when there's righteousness is equal playing field. Justice is bringing everything onto an equal playing field. And so so when you're talking about the judges, these judges are enacting this desire to put everything back into an equal playing field. It's actually God being the supreme judge that is directing them, like how they get filled with the Spirit and all of that. One interesting thing is, remember that judges, the only requirement for judges before, when Moses was alive, was that they were righteous individuals. I'm sorry, but very few of the judges in Judges are righteous individuals. It doesn't exist. And this is an example, well, it does, like with Deborah, but like what I'm saying is like, this is the example of like how things are really going downhill for Israel and it's not looking good. But yet God remains present with them. And oh, by the way, wait a second, I just want to make sure that I'm not saying it incorrectly. Hold on. But yeah, I think it is. Okay. The word for judge in Hebrew is also like a play on the word for like, oh wait, no, I'm not going to go into that because if I say this, I might be wrong. So never mind. I'll do it later. I'll research it and I will present it if I'm right. It's something I want to check later. One thing I did want to say very particularly is in Jesus' time were these people called zealots. They looked at the stories of old as ways that they themselves should act. And when they were very violent, when Rome had occupied the land, the zealots saw this as a judge-like moment. And so they took to arms in very similar ways. And they were known to hide and to come out and ambush the Romans. And there is a reason why this movement was so strong, is because it is in Scripture. And this is something that, this is just another example of how, like how the kosher laws have taken the concept of the eating and have like made it even more they convoluted it. Same thing happened with the zealots. And the zealots actually did believe that they were enacting God's righteous judgment upon the land. And when Christ arrived, he threw them for a loop. And it's just fascinating to me. So I did want to mention that. So it does make sense why they were so against Rome when you read Judges. One other thing is there is a ton of number play in this book. You got like the number 30, 40, 70, 77, 3, 4, 10. It's everywhere. It's like, how many sons does this guy have? How many daughters? How many years did they reign over the land? It's like, there was 40 years of peace, 40 years of oppression. They kind of like counteract each other. It's like you got like 30. Oh yeah, there's 40 sons, 30 grandsons, 77 elders. And it's like all of these different like instances of these numbers again and again and again. So I thought it was interesting that all these numbers are coming back into play. And one last thing had to do with, so judges are, in a sense, Israel's closest thing to a human king. It's as close as they got before Saul. And so I did want to make that point clear. There is a difference between a judge and a priest. This will come into play when we enter Samuel. So well, I'll just say that before we get started. I think this is a good place to have a small break, because we'll just go ahead and just chunk away at it later. So, all right, I will be back in a few minutes. I know it's earlier than normal, but this will be a good pausing point. And then because when we get into Samuel, if we do get into Samuel tonight, it's not that much content. So, all right, I'll see you guys on the other side of the break. Okay, here we are. So let's just start right off at Judges 1:7. Judges 1:7. Dad and Mom and Dad, there's a certain name here. For anyone who doesn't know, Adonai Bezek is a way that we memorize. The way that we memorize this person's name when playing a game called Bible Trivia was to think like, okay, so the thumbs were cut off and the toes were cut off, and it's like, and you add an eye. So it's like, who was the person that had his toes and thumbs cut off and cut off the thumbs and toes of 70 or 77 70 kings, I think. Is add an eye. Zach. So anyway,
pretty cool.
So now,
that's an imagination.
Right. Well, I love that game. Anyway, so but this goes back into the name thing. What does Adonai Bezek mean? Why 70 kings? We were talking about nations.
It's about God, isn't it?
70
Lord.
names.
Yeah, Lord of something.
70 gods, 70 nations. Yeah, something about
Lord.
My Lord.
Yeah.
Or something else. There's because the Adonai is not exactly the same as my Lord. But it can be Lord of Lightning. And it's like the concept of lightning, like with nations in the worshiping of lightning and stuff like that. It's really interesting. It's like sparks or lightning. And he cut off the thumbs and the toes of 70 kings. So he was starting to put himself into the place of God on high. And it is interesting when you look at it from the perspective of the 70 nations. Anyway. So, and most of the chapter, the first chapter of Judges, most of the chapter has to do with some pretty bad failures. Okay, so you can read it for yourselves if you haven't read it before. So this is just a wonderful first chapter, right? It's not going so well. Anyway, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. The angel of the Lord. I wonder who that is. Went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said to the Israelites, I brought you out of Egypt into this land that I swore to give your ancestors, and I said I would never break my covenant with you. For your part, you are not to make any covenants with the people living in this land. Instead, you were to destroy their altars. But you disobeyed my command. Why did you do this? So now I declare that I will no longer drive out the people living in your land. There will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a constant temptation to you. We talked about like the eyes being very important, and also the side, like where Eve comes from, is like in the thorn and in the side, is really it's an interesting play when it comes to like how when you see things or how like certain things come from your side, like how Eve became a thorn in Adam's side. It's interesting. So anyway, and if you think of it this way too, okay. So remember when I said that you have like Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Now, if you're talking about like how if you are looking at also if you chase Lady Folly, that those nations, the the lady, like if you look at the gods of the other nations as Lady Folly as well, they had come from the side. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's basically saying this thing that you are clinging onto will be clinging onto, is like placing it into your side, will be jabbing at you, and it's cool imagery. So then you have verse 11. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so God saw it as evil, right? And served the images of Baal or Baal, and so this is the beginning of well, not really the beginning, but this is just like an iteration of Israel's prostitution, and so then they abandoned. So anyway, verses 22 to 23. God himself says, I did this to test Israel, to see whether or not they would follow the ways of the Lord as their ancestors did. That is why the Lord left those nations in place. He did not quickly drive them out or allow Joshua to conquer them. So they quite bitterly failed that test. And so this is why earlier in the chapter is like, they're going to be a thorn in your side because you chose wrong and you didn't trust me. All the way back in Jericho, like you used to, like you didn't trust me. And this is really the beginning of a downward spiral. Well, not the beginning, but like a really back portion of the spiral. Chapter 5, verse 20. Now the whole chapter is essentially a beautiful poem. I want to talk about Hebrew poetry. So you have this thing called parallelism. Parallelism is when you have an idea and the next section is amplified or reiterated. It's like the same image, but the purpose of poetry is to take something that you would normally say in any other given circumstance and really turn it into an art form. And one way of doing that is parallelism, where you have the exact same idea portrayed two different ways. Now, this particular one is very heavy with parallelism. There's another poem we might get to today that's heavy on chiastic parallelism, which is the complete opposite. You have one idea and it's contrasted. And so that's how basically all of Hebrew poetry works. There's also alliteration, but the primary focus of Hebrew poetry has to do with parallelism and chiastic parallelism. So an example of this, and I'll just give a small sample, is verses 24 to verses 24 to 27. So most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. May she be blessed above all women who live in tents. Sisera asked for water, and she gave him milk. Okay, so that's one, right? In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him yogurt. So it's another way of saying exactly the same thing. Then with her left hand she reached for a tent peg, and with her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera with the hammer, crushing his head. With a shattering blow, she pierced his temple. So she struck him with the hammer, crushing his head. With a shattering blow, she pierced his temple. He sank. He fell. He lay still at her feet. And where he sank, there he died. From the window, Sisera's mother looked out. Through the window, she watched for his return. So, like, you see what I'm saying? It's like the same thing, just like, again, it's really cool how Hebrew poetry works in that thing. Anyway, and I also had another thing that was interesting is verse 20 in this chapter, so a little bit back. The stars fought from heaven. The stars in their orbits fought against Sisera. Very interesting that the stars are being brought into play here. No mention of stars before, right? So, anyway, chapter 6. Gideon is not someone you want to model yourself after. Please understand that. I have myself heard, and I've also heard other people talk about how they've heard, that Gideon is a model figure. No, he isn't. he's a weasel. And it's like, it's not, he's weak, he's timid. He is definitely not someone you want to aspire to be like. He is, you can read the whole story for yourselves, like when it talks about like testing God and like see, well, if this is truly of you, then do this stuff. Yeah, that is just a small portion of the entire story. Now, chapter 26, verse 26 of 6. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary. So it has to do with God telling him to get rid of the, I forget what God it was. It might have been Baal. I think it was Baal. To get rid of the altar to Baal and then build one for Yahweh. So remember where we said that Yahweh has no problem with high places if they're for him. And so this is what God's saying is like, get rid of the high place of Baal or Baal. I say Baal, but anyway. Like, get rid of the high place of Baal and then make one for me. And anyway, so where was the 620? I think I said 26, right? Yeah, 26. Laying the stones carefully, sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. We talked about Asherah a lot. So the Asherah pole, the concept of the tree of life coming from her stomach. And the pole itself is kind of questionable. I noticed I lost signal again, but I caught it this time. So anyway, I caught it right. I saw it go blank all of a sudden. So, all right. Yeah, so I was in that whole section with verse 26. Okay, I need to show the interlinear here. And Dad, if I lose connection, please tell me, because sometimes it does when I do this. So, here we go. Judges and chapter 6. Verses 30. There we are. All right, so. And the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son, that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it. But Joash said to all who stood against him, would you plead? Plead. Like, this is, it actually means defend. Or this particular means like, here, I'll just show you to strive or contend, or to, not just that, but to fight over. Like, would you basically come to his defense? Would you actually fight for him? If people who would plead for him to be put to death warning. So yeah, if he what? If he is what? A god. Now, so if he truly is a god, actually it can actually mean like if he truly is your Elohim. And this. The reason is like if you talk about like God as in Yahweh, they reference him as a title. And if Baal is Elohim to you, then let him work. So let him strive. Let him fight for himself, just like how Yahweh is able to fight for himself. If God himself can fight for, if Yahweh can fight for us, let Baal do the same thing, and let's see what happens. And it's interesting to me too. That this is, and he calls him Jerubbaal, which actually, it does mean like, let Baal fight for himself, is basically the meaning of his name. But I did think it's interesting here that Joash, who had this altar, was totally fine with this statue being torn down. So I thought that was a very interesting tidbit, and it's also left over, I'm very confused not confused about, but I think it's interesting that they go up to Joash, who had the altar, and then they said, bring out your son so we can kill him. And Joash is like, my hands are washed on this one. Like, let Saul fight for himself on this one. And I think it's very interesting. And yet Gideon was afraid the whole time. He didn't know that his father was going to defend him like he did. And it's very, very fascinating.
Speaking of Gideon being afraid.
Yes.
Did I detect some sarcasm in 6:12-14?
The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty hero. Yeah, he was threshing in the grave. He was in hiding. He goes, mighty hero. The Lord is with you. Sir, Gideon replied, the Lord is with us. Why has all this happened to us? And where are the miracles? And then when God does all this, like Gideon is just, yeah, what? Go ahead.
Yeah, it says he's whining.
Yeah.
And now the Lord's forsaken us. But 14 says, the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours.
I don't know.
You shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites.
It might actually mean how my spirit is filling you. But it could be sarcastic because we have encountered sarcasm in Scripture before, so it could very well be.
I'm just wondering if the scribes are having a little fun.
It might be. Yes, just like when Zacharias says, like, how will I know? Like, I am an old man, and Gabriel goes, and I am Gabriel.
Yeah. I'm Gabriel.
Yeah, so the Bible is definitely known to have sarcasm, especially the whole book of Jonah. In my opinion, my favorite Old Testament book is Jonah. So I really don't know how we're going to approach it here, because I actually did a Bible study that was 4 sessions long, 4 hours. It would be 2 sessions if we were to do it in this setting, and I don't do so much in it, but anyway. But yes, that one's also filled with a lot of sarcasm.
God has a sense of humor.
Right. Yeah, it's spicy, that book. So, like every verse essentially has sarcasm in it, in some way, shape, or form. Like, just an example, it's like all the people on the boat are throwing everything off, and then here's Jonah, the prophet of the Lord, sleeping in the bottom. And so they're like, wake up and pray to your God. Whose God is yours? And he goes, well, I worship Yahweh, the Lord of the land and of the sea. And then they freak out. It's like, it's cool. I like that. I like that book a lot.
I like what Mackie says about, it's starting in verse 1. Dove.
Oh yeah, son of faithfulness.
Yeah.
So it's fun stuff. Anyway, that's just brief. I don't know how we're gonna approach Jonah here. It's my favorite because I actually have it's funny. I have received some pushback from people who think that the Bible cannot be satirical in nature, and it's like, oh no, Jonah is a satire. It's like the entire thing. It's just like this crazy contrast-filled. Anyway, I'm off topic right now. So, cool story. We'll see how we approach it when we get there. Anyway, so okay. So, chapter 8, verses 23 to 27. But Gideon replied, I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over you. However, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from the plunder you collected from your fallen enemies. When was the last time this was done? The enemies, being Ishmaelites, all were. What type of earring?
Gold and silver.
We'll get to silver later. So, gladly, they replied. They spread out a cloak. A cloak is another way of saying glory in Hebrew, by the way. There are 2 words for glory. Anyway, And a cloak is something that someone with glory would wear. So anyway, so they spread out a cloak, and each one threw in a gold earring he had gathered from the plunder. The weight of the gold earrings was, wait a second, let's take a look here.
What?
Yeah, it was 1,700 shekels. So,
Thanks for clearing that up.
What? What?
I said thanks for clearing that
No,
up.
but I'm talking about the number. Yeah.
I fully understand now.
Yeah, well, actually, my translation says 43 pounds. But not including the royal ornaments and pendants, the purple clothing worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains around the necks of their camels. So, wait a second, how far did I want to go? 27. Gideon made a sacred what? He made a sacred ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon, all the Israelites prostituted themselves. What did they do with the golden calf? By worshiping it. And it became a trap for Gideon and his family. Very interesting parallelism here. So, anyway, verses 29 to 31. Then Gideon, son of Joash, returned home. He had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. Wait a second. If you remember, what does Deuteronomy say about when you have a king? There's like a whole section.
Don't multiply
Don't have wives. Don't multiply your gold. Don't, exactly, all this stuff. He had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. He also had a concubine in Shechem who gave birth to a son whom he named Abimelech. What does Abimelech mean? Obimelech. My father is king. Okay, so my father is king. When you are a king in Israel, like when you finally have one, don't let them do this. So anyway, Gideon died when he was very old, and he was buried in the grave of his father Joash at Ophrah in the land of the clan of Abiezer. Oh, my father is a helper, by the way. So that's what it means. But all right, so that's a preview of, oh, and this is another thing too, is Obimelech. It means my father is king. And it's a preview of this is what happens when my father is king. Like this is, like that's basically the inference that's going on here. 10:14. Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them rescue you in your hour of distress. I think this is potentially sarcastic by God when he says these things. Let them help you. Yeah, just like with Baal, let him fight for himself. Like when you have a problem, you come running to me. I don't think so, because we don't have an established relationship anymore. It's not like you're ruining it. Chapter 11, verses 29 to 31. At that time, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he went throughout the land of Gilead and Manasseh, including Mizpah and Gilead. And from there, he led an army against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. He said, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will give to the Lord whatever comes out of my house to meet me when I return in triumph. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Now, one thing, when was the last time someone was going to sacrifice a child of theirs, because it ends up being his daughter? When was the last time this kind of sort of happened in the Bible, if you remember?
This is Abraham?
Yep. Yep. This is actually chiastic parallelism with the story of Isaac. So with Isaac, God tells Abraham to go sacrifice Isaac, right? But then he stops him just before him because he wants to make sure that he can trust him, right? Here it's reversed. where Jephthah said, I'll give you anything that comes out of this door as a sign of my faithfulness to you. And God never told him to do this. And then it just so happened that it was his daughter that came up to greet him. Yes, she died. I've heard arguments that it was that she was just put away. No, she died. It's very, very clear in the way that the Hebrew is saying it, that she was offered up. Now, remember, God says later, I never dreamed of you sacrificing your children to me. It was a test for Isaac, and then Jephthah should have put his foot in his mouth. When he said something like this. God never ordered it, but it was heavily ironic, that situation. And it's just really terrible. But anyway.
Now it's his only child.
Yeah, it's really, really crazy. Yeah,
Yes, she was his only child, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, your son, your only son, your only daughter. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. All right, chapter 13, verse 18. So, why do you ask my name? The last time that happened. The angel of the Lord replied, it's too wonderful for you to understand. And last time that happened was with Israel, and when he was told that, when he struggled. And so it's interesting here. Let's talk about Samson a little bit. Samson's name, do you know what it means? Because he's dedicated to the Lord, mind you. He is dedicated as a Nazarite. But what does Samson mean? Man of the sun. So, as in S-U-N. And this is really interesting, how the names have already been altered to the point where they're going toward the gods of other nations. It is interesting. So his name means man of the sun. And so because like Shamash is the name for sun. So it's the S is really like a Shah. So anyway, and the physical appearance, it's potential he was muscular. I tend to think he wasn't. I mean, people have heard me say this before. I tend to think he wasn't, particularly because it's mentioned that the strength is in his hair. And so when you see depictions of him being super muscular, like a Herculean figure, that's not the implication that the Bible's giving. Is that he was strangely strong. And so he could have very well been, I don't know. But it is interesting, and it's very close to the Achilles story of Greek mythology as well. Or not, I would say Greek religion. I try to refrain from saying mythology because of like how the other cultures actually did believe this. So
legend.
Yeah, legend. Yeah. So Achilles, he had one weakness, and so Samson had one. Actually, he had two weaknesses. The other one was sex. He was a very sexual individual. He gets deceived by two women who, the first one might have been through sex because of the word enticed. The people tell the Philistine to entice him to get the answer to the riddle. But with Delilah, it's absolutely sexual in nature. It's actually more like a BDSM experience. Like how it's being played out, because she's like, oh, tell me what your weakness is, and it's like, and that's the whole thing, so she can tie him down and then have her way with him. That's the implication being given. So he's very sexually active, and but he does do these weird Herculean feats, and weird bouts of revenge and anger. It's like he's incontrollable, like a very, very crazy character. Anyway. So in verses 1 to 4 and 14, one day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, a young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me. of all the things we've talked about, think of course, Eve and Genesis 6. When they see these women as desirable and they take them as wives. Yep. Her father and mother objected. Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you can marry? They asked. Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife? But Samson told his father, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." His father and mother didn't realize the Lord was at work in this. So interesting that Samson is playing into these, I guess you could say, Eve-like characteristics, but God's still getting his will done. This is a common theme. Same thing with Joseph when he told his brothers, yeah, he sold me into slavery, but God was working in this. Same thing with Samson. And it's really interesting. So I keep saying that. Anyway. Okay, so that's that. Okay, chapter 50. I lost my finger. I lost where I had my finger in my Bible, so I had to find it. 15:18. 15:18. Samson was now very thirsty, and he cried out to the Lord, "You have accomplished this great victory by the strength of your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of these pagans?" It's not like he's any better. It's not like he is in any great moral characteristic that's better than these pagans. It's really making a stark contrast. It's okay, so you got Samson, you got the pagans, and they're really kind of not that much different. It's not like he's really so much more righteous than they are. It's just that the Lord is working through him. And it goes to his head. Chapter 16, verse 25. Yeah, the BDSM scene, but anyway. Verse 25, just after that. Half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring out Samson so he can amuse us." What does that mean? To amuse us. And I'll read the rest of it. So he was brought up in the prison to amuse them, and they had him stand between the pillars supporting the arms. There's an implication of song and dance. And the best way I can think of explaining this would be in old Western movies, when they would take out a handgun or a pistol and they say, "Let's see you dance," type of a thing. It's a similar way of doing it, and he's dancing to the music. It's really interesting and it's an insult because women typically danced in such situations. So they emasculated him in the process. I'm not talking physically. I'm talking about by having him perform and dance in front of them. That was it's not great for his masculine portrayal in previous chapters. So anyway, very similar. Well, this is not similar to Achilles here, but his whole story has the cutting of the hair and all that stuff. Anyway, chapter 17, verses 3 to 6. Actually, no, let's double check it. Okay, he returned the money to her. Okay, so this has to do with Micah. So he returned the money to her, and she said, "I now dedicate these silver coins to the Lord. In honor of my son, I will have an image carved in an idol cast out of silver." So when he returned the money to his mother, she took 200 silver coins and gave them to a silversmith, who made them into an image and an idol, and these were placed in Micah's house. Micah set up a shrine for the idol, and he made a sacred ephod and some household idols. Then he installed one of his sons as his personal priest. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. So, okay, obviously, parallel back to Genesis, what seems right according to their eyes? What did their eyes see as desirable or good? They could be eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They chose what was good in their own eyes. Very Pharaoh-like as well. And when it says in those days, Israel had no king, what does that mean, really? They do have a king.
God.
Go ahead, Dad.
It was God that was their king.
But God had left them. It's basically like, yeah, of course he's still at work, but he just basically kind of washed his hands from this at this point.
Right.
In this day, Israel did not recognize Yahweh as their king. They didn't. Yeah, of course they didn't have an actual physical human king, but it was like, no, they lost Yahweh as their king. So in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did what seemed right in their own eyes. So they took themselves into the God position where they chose what was right. They chose what was wrong. Very interesting.
It's interesting in
yeah,
Judges how many times that phrase is stated in Judges.
And it gets amplified in the next two chapters. But anyway. Oh yeah, bye. Are you heading out? It was good seeing you. Yeah, you did. 1 second, I'll pause the recording until she leaves. And we're back again. All right, so we have verse 13 as well. Did we already read that part? Because I could have already done it. 17:13? No. I know the Lord will bless me now, Micah said, because I have a Levite serving as my priest. He doesn't say the Lord. He particularly names God. And he goes, I know that Yahweh will help me now. So it's like he's adding to his collection of gods at his disposal. It's just fascinating how the mindset has changed. So remember, we started at Judges, and they're already making bad decisions, and here we are with Micah. And it's debatable where Micah fits in the. Is it Micah? Because Phineas appears out of the blue at the end of Judges, and it's like, where did Phineas come from? He didn't live 300 years, so it's interesting. But okay, okay. So 18:1. Now, in those days, Israel had no king. And then this whole entire chapter is just a mess. The entire chapter, it can be described as chaos. It's very, it's like you have some bit of there's like a section where they you have the priest of the Lord. And it's like you have like a mix of like Yahweh presence, and then you have like other stuff happening and the crazy. It's like there's like no. The best way I could describe it is like the waves of the sea. It's like so hard to like see any good coming of this chapter. So in chapter 19, verse 1. Now in those days, Israel had no king. And it's funny because this is still part of the same story. No, never mind. No, it's not. This is the other Levite that is mentioned here. Now, this chapter is intense, but the implications of 22 to 25 are interesting. So while they were enjoying
the 22 all of a sudden,
1922.
Oh, okay. I'm back. I'm still back in 18.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what are they talking about in verse 30? If they're that it indicates that this Jonathan, the priest, was a grandson of Moses.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. As in the line had already been contaminated with other mindsets. Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yep, and I do have a note here. That's what it says. As in an ancient Hebrew tradition, some Greek manuscripts and Latin Vulgate Masoretic text read son of Manasseh. So the Masoretic text reads son of Manasseh, but still.
And that's the Septuagint and Vulgate reads.
The Masoretic, which is where we get most of the Hebrew from. However, in an ancient Hebrew tradition, it is the son of Moses. So, but anyway, it is interesting. So, but yeah, in 1922 to 25, I wonder what this sounds like. Well, they were enjoying themselves as a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house. They began beating at the door and shouting to the old man, "Bring out the man who's staying with you so we can have sex with him." The old man stepped outside to talk to them. "No, my brothers, don't do such an evil thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. Here, take my virgin daughter and and this man's concubine. So he offers his virgin daughter and the concubine. Anyway, Well, it's just one person. Sorry, it's the concubine and the, sorry, I made a mistake. He goes, yeah, like, just use her, okay? I will bring them out to you, and you can abuse them. And no, them, it is two different, because I thought the Levite went over to talk about the daughter because she went back to her dad because maybe it was just another daughter. And then
this isn't the dad though. This is the guy. They're on their way home.
Oh yeah, they saw. Okay, sorry, I'm mixing up stories, but still, it's very similar. Like to the Lot story. I will bring them out to you, and you can abuse them and do whatever you like, but don't do such a shameful thing to this man. But they wouldn't listen to him, so the Levite took hold of his concubine and pushed her out the door. The men of the town abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. Finally, at dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman returned to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. And then, so then he said something like, get up, let's go, but there was no answer. He got home, took a night, and he sent a message to the rest of Israel saying, such a horrible crime has not been committed in all the time since Israel left Egypt. You're the one that pushed her out of the door. But anyway, it's the concept of righteousness is completely convoluted, not to mention he was a Levite. So the implications of this are strong, not to mention it happens within Israel. It's not someplace like Sodom and Gomorrah, like outside somewhere. No, it's within Israel. And this craziness is happening. And yet he goes, oh, this is a terrible crime. He pushed her out the door, he cut her into little pieces, and he sent her throughout the land. He touched a dead body in the process. Mm-hmm. And all this stuff. And so it's, oh no, what they did, which was bad, don't get me wrong, but there's a convoluted concept of what justice and righteousness are. Okay. Chapter 20, verses 26 to 28. Then all the Israelites went up to Bethel and wept in the presence of the Lord and fasted until evening. They also brought burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. The Israelites went up seeking direction from the Lord. In those days, the Ark of the Covenant of God was in Bethel, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and grandson of Aaron, was the priest. If this is at the end of Judges, is this truly at the end of the 300 years? So it's potentially an earlier entry, or where, you know what I'm saying. But anyway.
Well, that's like the previous one had to be earlier.
Right, because it was like the grandson of Moses, right?
300
Yep. So where the chapters begin in those days, it's there's potential that these three were added later. Not added later, but added after the other. You know what I'm saying. Anyway. The Israelites asked the Lord, should we fight against our relatives from Benjamin again, or should we stop? The Lord said, go. Tomorrow I will hand them over to you. And then it's this rest of this story here. So, they still go to God, and God is actually interested in talking with them. And it's funny that they actually consult him in the proper way. And he did, once again, maintain his covenant promise. I don't think he liked what anything that was happening, though. So this is yet another example of God's compromising nature. He did talk with them there. And it's interesting. I'm going to try to refrain from saying that. But anyway, chapter 21, verse 25. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. And that's one heck of a way to end that book. And it's it goes back to sometimes they consulted God. To them at that moment, that seemed right to them. And other times not, but God was still happy to talk with them even when they consulted him. It's interesting. I said it again. So,
I wonder if this is a throwback to there's a way that seems right to a man, but the ways thereof.
You're talking about
the proverb.
Yeah, I was about to say we haven't gotten to proverb.
Well, yeah, I know. I'm wondering.
No. I know what you're saying. It'll be interesting to. I'll say this. I will never read Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, or Job in the same way again. That's why we're. I mean, please, you can mention that particular proverb. That's not, but I will never read that stuff again in the same way that I have growing up. It's just like these words like shout at me now. But yeah, I would have to say probably, according to what you're saying. All right, anything on Judges before we move on to Samuel? We're only doing a few chapters here, but. Okay. Let's talk about Samuel. What does the name Samuel mean? His name is El. So, what is God's name? Yahweh. But El is an ancient, according to archaeology, El was a competing god. But
isn't El part of Elohim?
Well, one second. In Hebrew, Yahweh and El are combined with Elohim. But anyway, what were you saying, Dad?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. El is a short for Elohim, isn't it not? Individual.
No, not necessarily short.
No, but I mean, it would be like El being God as opposed to Elohim meaning many. Like
Eloah is the singular form of Elohim. So El can be God, and it is God, and we talked about it in previous things. But the actual singular form of Elohim is Eloah, and then El is the shortened form of the shortened form. So, or the shortened form of the singular form. Yeah, you're right. But it is interesting that El is one of the contrasting gods in the culture. But I do believe Samuel's name is absolutely in relationship to Yahweh. I'm not saying it's not. But it is interesting that it says his name is El instead of like Sam Yah or something like that, Samuel, but it's not. It's Samuel. And so it's interesting. My name is is Yahweh is El. So that Yahweh is God, like what we were saying. But or that El, if you really wanted to go there, that El and Yahweh are equal. It's the same God. But there's debate on that. But to say that his name is El is interesting to me. And we're talking about like El Shaddai and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I thought that was cool to bring up. And so what is his role? Samuel's role. It's only you two in here, so what is Samuel's role? I mean, what position does he hold?
The priest.
Oh, he's a priest, and he's a judge, and a
Levite, Nazarite.
Yeah,
and a
Nazarite.
prophet.
And a prophet,
Who had a similar position before? Not Nazarite.
You mean before Samuel?
Mm-hmm. It's like Moses Part 2. Samuel takes the role of Moses, essentially. He basically is as close to Moses as you can get in terms of like other characters being portrayed here. He is a priest, he's a prophet, and he is a judge. A judge is as close as possible as you could get to a king before a king existed in Israel. So it's
Interesting.
We were talking, and how judges enacted justice. You had the priests who served as God's representative, the mediating force, but not just the mediating force. It was more like Moses took on that role of God himself, and so Samuel did what God said. He didn't quite have that role, and then he is also a prophet. So he sees things that are the way that God sees them, and it's there we go. So chapter 1, verse 9. I'm in Ruth because I skipped Ruth. All right, chapter 1, verse 9. Once, after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli, the priest, was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle. And actually, so let's talk about more about meaning of names. What does Eli mean? Any guess?
Something about Elohim? I don't know.
No, this is a different El. It's actually written with a different letter altogether. It has a different pronunciation in Old Hebrew, has the same pronunciation in Modern Hebrew as El, but it means high one, elevated one. The thing that is higher, elevated, like the high priest, on high. So Hannah means favor or grace. And know that, Dan?
I was just saying. I was just saying I don't know about what Hannah means.
Favor or grace. And so it's interesting when you think about her role in this as well. So anyway, chapter 2 is poetry and it's chiastic, which means you have one statement that's followed by like a rivaling statement. So like, my heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. Now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me. No one is holy like the Lord. There's no one besides you. There's no rock like our God. Okay. Stop acting so proud and... Oh, wait. I had actually... yeah. Let me see. Oh, yeah, here. Verse 7. The Lord makes some poor and others rich. He brings some down and lifts others up. He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes, placing them in seats of honor. For all the earth is the Lord's, and he has set the world in order. He will protect his faithful ones. And here's the Catholic quote. But the wicked will disappear in darkness. No one will succeed by strength alone. Those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. He thunders against them from heaven. The Lord judges throughout the earth. He gives power to his king. He increases the strength of his anointed one. So it's like, yeah, he thunders judgment, but he anoints the king. He protects the faithful, but the wicked will disappear. I love how Hebrew poetry works. Anyway, all right. So chapter 3, verses 2. So starting in 2, we're just doing that one real quick. One night, Eli, who was almost what by now? Blind. Remember when we had blind characters before, such as Isaac? And so it's basically saying Eli is losing touch. And yeah, he is physically blind in this portrayal, but remember, he has issues with, like when God says he's going to do something, he's like, well, just let God do it. Instead of acting like a Moses figure and saying, no, don't do this. Or I will do something, or try to step in the way of God's judgment. He does, and he's like, well, if that's what God wants, that's what he's going to do. So he was almost blind. And had gone to bed. Oh, by the way, sleeping in Hebrew can mean like not being aware of things. Same thing happened with Jonah. But anyway, so or Jesus. But we'll get to that. Preview of coming attractions. It's once again it's acting as like the opposite reaction to things. So instead of Jesus not being aware, it was the disciples that weren't aware. Anyway, that's the story for another day. So verse 9. So he said to Samuel, "Go and lie down again, and if someone calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is heeding.'" So it's like or listening. It might be. I'm going to make sure it's Shema because there's actually another word for listening. So let me just say. 1 Samuel 3:9 interlinear. I just want to make sure. Nope, Shema. Yep, it's definitely that. Yep, heeding. Your servant is heeding. Verse 18. So Samuel told Eli everything. He didn't hold anything back. It is the Lord's will. Eli replied, "Let him do what he thinks best." Remember, Moses said, "Don't do it." And then God is like, well, maybe I want to, but I really want to. And the Lord's like, remember your promise. And God's like, well, yeah, but this is a wicked generation. Moses is like, I know. But anyway, yeah, I told you don't get that with Eli. And so you get chapter 4, verse 8. Help! Who can save us from what? From what?
The hand of these mighty gods.
These. It's particularly plural. And these mighty gods of Israel. So they were even confused at what if they had one God or not, which wouldn't have been as unclear if they had if Israel had heeded what God was saying to them. But yet the Philistines thought they had other gods. So it's anyway. So help! Who can save us from these mighty gods of Israel? They're the same gods who destroyed the Egyptians with plagues when Israel was in the wilderness. Interesting. Verse 15. He was 98 years old and blind. By this point, it was over. And so this is when he's told that Israel defeated the Philistines. And last thing here, in verse 18, when the messenger mentioned what had happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backward from his seat beside the gate. He broke his neck and died, for he was old and glorious. The actual meaning means heavy, really, really heavy. But in Hebrew, it's the same word as holy. Not holy, I'm sorry, glorious. So he had a lot of weight to him, a lot of glory. It's like he fell back in all his glory. And yeah, it's funny. Anyway, so chapter 5, yeah, and they could have easily said bat as well, because they did when the dagger was swallowed by the stomach, I guess you could say, and it didn't have any implication of glory there. But the word for glory was particularly used in this context. So, chapter 5, verses 3 to 4. But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him in his place again. But the next morning, the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time his head and hands had been broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. Pardon me. Two quick things on that one. So the position that Dagon took was more like, like how like we talk about in Revelation, we cast our crowns before the Lord. It was that type of motion. It was like bowing down. And with the head and the hands cut off. What did God say to do with the Torah? What did he tell the Israelites to do with the Torah?
Yeah.
Bind around your head and around your hands. So your head is the way that you represent yourself, and the hand is everything that you do. And it had that common meaning. With the head and hands gone for this God, you can't represent yourself, and you can't do anything about it. And it's like it's really sucker punch to the guy. Okay, so it's really really cool stuff when you look at it from these perspectives. And then you have chapter 7, verse 6. So they gathered at Mizpah, and in a great ceremony drew water from a well and poured it out before the Lord. They also went without food all day and confessed that they had sinned against the Lord. It was at Mizpah that Samuel became Israel's judge. And this is, once again, we already talked about it, but it's interesting here that he became judge in this chapter, and then immediately in the next chapter they're talking about a king. And but in those days, Israel had no king, and they did whatever was right in their own lives. That's basically where we're going to end today. That's all I got for today. I'm so surprised that we got through all of that. I am really surprised. But I think this is really cool because now we're entering the kingly saga. I think we will see, but we'll see what's going on. But we'll see if we can do I don't know how it's going to go. I'm just talking out loud, but we're going to focus a lot on Saul, David, Solomon. then we'll breeze again through various sections of other kings. Yeah, we will spend a lot of time on Saul, a lot of time on David, a lot of time on Saul. And that's basically all I got. So anyone have anything they want to say before we go? Okay.
Another good session. Just another good session.
It was fun. All right, let's go ahead and give it to John on this one. Father, wow. Like, I will never be able to read the Bible in the same way again. It's really amazing. The things that I always just took for granted, like, for example, that God falling with the idol falling with the head and the hands cut off, but the implications of that. Or like the implications of when various things were said, like by various characters, when Eli was blind, or like in the meaning, the meaning of names, like how, like with Hannah, is a symbol of your favor and grace. This is just awesome. I am really enjoying being able to serve as your vessel when it comes to presenting this study. Thank you for showing me so much, and thank you for guiding how I look at things and presenting things. It's funny because in the middle of some of these studies, I'm saying things and I'm realizing that things are coming into more unity and fruition than I even expected, and then I even knew. Sometimes it kind of like clicks a little bit differently when I say them. So we just put everything in your hands and thank you for this, because it truly is through your favor and grace that we are able to do these things. We thank you for keeping this meeting going strong. We ask your hand of grace upon all viewing, all who attended in person, all who are online, everyone that is involved in this gathering, as well as the world at large. We just ask that you bring us peace, your true and genuine loving peace. And may we continue to see things the way that you see them. And may we not decide what is good and evil in our own eyes. Father, we ask that we recognize you as our King. We ask that we do not look anywhere else, and that you alone remain the bronze snake that heals us of all things. So we thank you for the wonders that you provide. And in the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. All right.